Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the pre-stream for the Undertale Theater. You're gonna have to bear with me a little bit here. I'm not doing super hot today. but I'll do my best. Andros will not have his way with me. Just making sure I've got the actual theater up. Yep, there we go. Excellent. Good morning, Zed Slayer. Let's see. So, where to begin? Maybe a couple of factoids. Some of you might not be aware of the theater. They are, I'm not sure where the term theater actually came from. I'm not sure where I came up with that, but the idea was to do what I now know is referred to as a fan dub of certain video games. Something that I kind of like to do in general back in the day, but usually just, me talking alongside the game rather than trying to put it together in a professional format. The original theater was for Paper Mario 2, a game that was essentially perfect for Paper Mario 2, or for a theater concept. It was pretty much a perfect fit, because not only does it have the nice divvying up of the chapters, but even the structure of it suited this kind of format. There were clear intros and outros. The gameplay was something that we could show or not show pretty much entirely based on choice, so you could pick and choose what you wanted to show. And of course, the way it did it was most characters had a chapter to themselves, and then they'd vanish until the last chapter, which will sound familiar in a minute here. So Paper Mario 2 was perfect for theater, and of course, that's why I started with that, because it was the easiest, and I'm trying to figure out what the heck I'm doing, right? That's something I've talked about before, and it's pretty much always my approach when it comes to creative works or productive works or anything. I make this to make that, right? Which is a fairly common kind of concept. Suikoden, right? They made Suikoden 1 so that they could make Suikoden 2. So I made Paper Mario 2 so I could make Final Fantasy 9, so I could make Undertale, so I could make whatever comes next. And so forth and so on. We're still learning. And that's the next thing I want to talk about. So Paper Mario 2, I was trying to adhere to the game pretty much one-to-one. No changes, no alterations, no nothing. When it came to Final Fantasy 9, that was originally my mentality walking into it. But as I went through it, and as we spent 4 years putting together the FF9 theater, I learned a whole lot more about directing, voice acting, editing, and all sorts of aspects of the production process. So, I got a lot more confident in saying, why don't we change a few things? So we did. We didn't do a lot of changes in the Final Fantasy IX theater. It was mostly little stuff, addendums, variances. As I often said during the director's notes for FF9, we were trying to add stuff that the text lacked. Because while I love FF9 to death, its translation is actually pretty lacking when you really dig into it on a line-by-line basis. Go figure. But that leads us to this one. Undertale, let's throw some factoids here, shall we? Final Fantasy IX had 249 separate roles in it, which was played by 65 distinct actors. That's pretty insane. So, why Undertale next? Well, let's follow this path a little bit here. Exactly, Dakota. Let's follow this path for a moment. We did Paper Mario 2 because it perfectly fitted the format. But normally I would build up to something like Final Fantasy IX. Well, for those of you who remember, we jumped into Final Fantasy IX specifically because I needed people to be involved. Nobody wanted to be involved in the Paper Mario 2 theater, and it was a source of continual and aggravating frustration for me. No one wanted to be part of that project. So I had to pick something that was popular. And I put out some feelers, and I kind of tossed some ideas out, and I kind of watched how people reacted. And the game that most people reacted positively towards was Final Fantasy VI, which I flat out refused to do. So instead, we went with Final Fantasy IX, which a lot of people also were rather invested in. So lots of people got involved in FF9. That's cool. That's awesome. And now it's time to escalate a little bit. So we went with Undertale for mostly the same reason. We wanted, hey Frieza, can't remember the last time I've seen you on my stream. We went with Undertale for mostly the same reason. It's a game that a lot of people like, and therefore we had a better chance of more people being involved in the project. So I could get more people in, and more actors, and I wouldn't have to worry about it. Undertale, however, was intended to be a little bit of a step down in terms of difficulty from FF9. Little did I know it would actually be a step up, just in different ways. I didn't actually realize this at the time, but the thinking was, okay, Undertale's much shorter than FF9, has much fewer roles, and people are interested in it. Perfect next pick, right? FF9 had 249 distinct speaking roles. Undertale has 171, which is way more than I thought it would be. And we had 44 separate and distinct actors voicing those 171 roles. Yeah. Nevertheless, I was walking into this pretty ambitiously, because I had two major objectives when it came to Undertale Theater. The first was I really wanted to push on my side of things, which I'll talk about in a bit, because that's a whole separate category. But the other thing was, I really wanted to make sure we didn't lose momentum. How many of you have ever heard of the swinging vine theory of production? Now, forgive me, I need to take a drink. Like I said, I'm still recovering from being sick. Yeah, by the way, a good quarter of those roles are all in the Chapter 5 narration. And some of those are repeats, too. It's just ridiculous. Anyways, so the swinging vine theory. It's something I actually dislike when it comes to professional productions, because it's kind of horrible. But there's still a logic to it when it comes to personal productions. The idea is, as you're swinging off of this vine, you need to already see that next vine you're going to reach for, and already be reaching out to that vine in order to catch it, right? In other words, as you're winding down production on Project A, you need to have already started winding up production on Project B. That's the idea, right? In a nutshell. So, okay, I didn't want to lose people. Like, we, at the time, had lost Random. This is before I'd actually been able to reconnect with them. And I'd lost several other people, too. Remember, we lost Shiryu, and we lost Foxby, and a whole bunch of other people. So, I was like, okay, I don't want to lose even more people, and I've got a lot of talented people, and they're all awesome. So I forced myself during my last rumination cycle, this is last October at this point, so over a year ago, to sit down and be like, okay, I'm gonna make this happen. And I did the recording side of things, got all that set up, and completely different approach from my perspective with regards to the logistics and the production side of the project. I've actually talked before about this. The voices and the lines is the longest chunk of any theater, but it's also the second to last step. I do an enormous amount of work before we ever get to the point where I get those lines in, right? That brings me to Undertale. So, one of the goals I had with Undertale, which admittedly I didn't think I was actually going to accomplish, but one of the goals I had was I didn't want to voice anybody in the theater. Now that may sound weird, because remember, one of the things I originally did this for was to stretch my voice acting chops, and I'd like to think I did a decent job with the FF9 roles I did, but if you also remember, I did more roles in FF9 than anybody else. In fact, I did more lines than most other people combined. The only people who were challenging me were Platy and Maverick. So I wanted to have a production where the overwhelming majority of the voice acting was done by the people, and I was willing to fill in holes if I had to. I am proud to say that I do actually voice one character, which I'd already reserved for myself. I'm not going to say who it is. If you don't know, don't share. And feel free to try and see if you can spot it as we go into it. But I wanted to do that because I felt like that would be a good, I guess, a marker, a goalpost. I don't know what to call that. A showcasing of how the theater's come along, that enough people are interested in it, that I don't have to fill in the gaps like I did with both previous theaters, right? In fact, I have a new goal for the next theater, but we'll get to that later. One moment, please. Oh my. Okay. But the other thing is, Undertale was extremely challenging from a production standpoint. For those of you who don't know Undertale, Undertale takes into account what you do, even when it comes to, like, reloading a save, for example. So what I mean by that is, in FF9 or in Paper Mario 2, if I flubbed something, or if something screwed up, I would just reload the previous save, and then re-record the section, right? Couldn't really do that in Undertale. Now, I could if I knew exactly what I was doing, because it is possible to go in and actually edit the files of Undertale in order to make some of this stuff happen. And I did have to do that once. But I only did that once, and it was because I made an absolutely massive screw-up that I had to fix. So, yeah, no, I had to get all of the recording the first try. Now, by some miracle, I actually did. The run you're about to see is the first attempt of pretty much everything you're seeing on screen. But what that meant was, before I could even start recording and playing the game, I had to sit down and map out everything. No just sitting down here and being like, oh, well, I'll just go ahead and play FF9 because I know FF9, right? Or I'll just play Paper Mario 2 because I know Paper Mario 2. When I was doing the recording side of both Paper Mario 2 and FF9, most of the directing decisions are things that would occur to me on the fly, right? How to use the camera, or how to move the characters, or what characters to bring to certain things, or whatever. Most of that was stuff I was basically making up as I went. With Undertale, I had to plan everything out, because everything had to go a certain way, because it's Undertale. This was honestly challenging, but I'd like to think I did a good job of it. I don't know, we'll see. Oh, we'll see. But let's talk about a few other things of the challenges with Undertale. So first of all, our main character doesn't speak. Technically, the main character actually has 3 total lines of dialogue in the game, which are voiced. But for the most part, no dialogue. So how do we do that? Well, one of the things I really wanted to push was the idea of visual storytelling, which at the time I was just getting into. Anybody who's watched any of my stuff over the last year knows I've been getting really, really into visual storytelling, especially with the extant stuff and the Trek rewrite stuff, as well as the World of Warcraft series. But this was actually the beginnings of that, getting into Undertale and trying to sell the emotions of Frisk, of the main character, without ever showing a single line of dialogue. Now, that wasn't just stuff with moving around on the overworld map, but also the heart that represents you. I would always try to do little things to try and indicate tone, or emotion, or perspective, or whatever. Trying to get a little bit of that in there. And again, all of that had to be planned out. The second thing, though, Undertale is a bit of a meta-narrative game by design. You know, the fact that it acknowledges if you reload a save is all I need to say about that. And I won't spoil on the off chance that you haven't seen Undertale or you're not familiar with all the details, but one of the things I stared at was, when I was doing this whole planning phase, what do I do about that? Do I go ahead and make it a meta-narrative? I decided to look into a few, this is, again, last year, I decided to look into a few other things that other people had done with Undertale, and the overwhelming majority of them have fourth wall breaks, or people who acknowledge that they're in a fan video of Undertale, you know, as a way to kind of cheekily acknowledge the meta-narrative thing. Stuff like that. Yes, Elitar. So, I looked at that and I was like, that doesn't interest me. First of all, it's been done by everyone else, and second of all of the in-lore, in-character stuff, all of the meta-narrative stuff within Undertale actually can make sense in-universe. So what I sought to do was craft the story of Undertale itself, rather than trying to craft the story of the game of Undertale, if you understand the distinction there. So you're not going to see a lot of fourth wall breaks, and you're not going to see a lot of the meta thing when it comes to Undertale. Unless you're really paying attention. Because I did throw in, I think, a grand total of 5 separate tiny little references, which are intended to be only there if you're paying attention. I think only one of them is obvious at all, and that's actually in Chapter 5. So, the overwhelming majority of those little references, what I'm trying to tell with that story, and I'll just say it outright, is the idea that Frisk is reloading their save. They are actually going back in time and rewinding time in order to determine their way through the path. It's just we don't see that. Because we're not, why would we, essentially? What we're seeing is the finished product. Similar to a game we just played, the final version of the timeline is the one that actually matters, and that's the one that we show for the theater. So there are tiny hints of these rewinds, but otherwise, for the most part, you wouldn't even notice it. Now, all of that was on purpose, of course, and anybody who actually knows my stuff knows that that's something I'm used to writing, because that's actually how the Bastion agents within the extant operate. They have the ability innately to rewind time, to save state, if you will, in order to try and deal with things. in order to try and approach things in certain ways. And so this is a concept I was already used to, and that's pretty much exactly how I did it. It was like, okay, well, do this, and do this, and do this. And so you'll see it if you pay attention. I'll try not to point them out, but, you know, maybe I'll point them out. I don't know. There's a couple. My personal favorite is when the main character's name changes. I don't think anybody noticed that one in the recording phase. Anyways, so I talked about how I voiced nothing. Let's talk about the three villages. So Undertale was going really smoothly. Got it all lined up, got people interested, got people auditioning, everything was cool. And then, as always happens, we ran into production issues. I was having issues getting some people doing some lines, as is pretty normal because it's just a thing we do for fun and blah, blah, blah. And I was having trouble getting certain people cast, and that was an issue. But the really big problem... So in Final Fantasy IX, there's a section I call the Three Villages. It's Kondapit, the Black Mage Village, and Medain Suri. All three of those villages are essentially back-to-back in the narrative, and all three of them have a fairly large number of NPCs, most of whom only have one line each, maybe two. And all of them are named characters that can't be skipped. Filling out the three villages was a nightmare in the FF9 theater, and one of the biggest hurdles I came into when it came to, you know, finishing that entire project. Anybody who's been part of this project already knows what I'm about to say, because we had our three villages in Undertale in the form of the Chapter 5 narration. The Chapter 5 narration, oh my god. So the Chapter 5 narration, it's at the beginning of Chapter 5. There's this nice long section of narration where they narrate the backstory and history of what's been happening and what led to the events of now. The catch is, it's one story told by, I think, 42, 43, or something like that. Somewhere in the 40s, different characters. Now, with the advantage of experience and hindsight, I've come up with multiple different ways I could have approached that. I could have made it work a little bit better by maybe having three actors, do all the lines. So a left actor, a middle actor, and a right actor, because all the characters are in that kind of a positioning. Or I could have had one person just do the whole thing. Or there's other methods I could have used that didn't occur to me at the time. I'm almost glad of that, because we did actually get all 40-some-odd people slotted, and it actually sounds really good in the final thing. But part of the problem was I needed to make sure that these people also sounded like they were sharing one story. If you don't understand the difficulty there, remember that these people don't hear each other's dialogue. They're not saying their dialogue right next to the other person who's speaking right before them, which changes the performance, obviously. So I had to try and guide these people into sounding like someone who's speaking right after the previous person. And so I'd let some retakes, I'd let some repositioning, and of course, there's only so much redoing we could do with that. What do I mean by that? Well, let's say I was voicing this person during the Chapter 5 narration. Realistically speaking, I shouldn't voice anyone else in that bundle. But more to the point, I definitely shouldn't voice someone right next to me. Hang on, it gets worse than that. I mentioned how this was kind of... Oh no, I haven't mentioned that yet, have I? This game was a logistical nightmare to put together. The technical side I already talked about, because I had to make sure the game was exactly the right way the first time through. But logistically, I had to sit down... an enormous amount of characters in this game do not have any entries. They don't have names. It's a frogget, and it happens to be the third frogget you interact with. So I had to go through and allocate who is what and where. I had to decide who was what and where. But hang on, it gets worse than that, because that meant if I had Evo voicing this character over in Chapter 2, who also happens to be one of the characters in Chapter 5, who is doing this particular line of dialogue, I have to make sure that Evo cannot place any other lines right next to this, including the ones that are in Chapter 3 or Chapter 1. All of this had to be mapped out and planned out, and it was an enormous hassle to do. From a purely technical side of things, this was substantially more complicated and more difficult to put together than the FF9 theater. I'm actually amazed at how well this thing turned out, to be honest with you. I also have to admit, I was kind of being a little bit pickier about certain roles. mostly because I felt comfortable doing that this time. So, the main goal of all the theaters is to get people involved, right? That's always priority number one. So if I have to bring someone in and they have kind of a crummy mic or a crummy recording situation or whatever, who cares? They want to be involved in the project. That's priority one. With Undertale, however, I allowed myself to be a little bit pickier for some of the roles, what I called the main roles and the major roles. And so I only allowed people who, had good setups or good mics to do that because we had enough people involved that I could afford to be picky, right? I was no longer a beggar. I can now be a chooser. So that was cool. But that then leads me to the Chapter 5 narration. Remember that I just needed people to be doing one-offs, but I needed these to sound a little bit, coherent, right? So that meant I was in the unusual position of having to be picky about the Chapter 5 narration lines, even though they're generally just one person doing one line. I don't think the next game I have planned is going to have a Three Villages section, but at this point I'm not even going to be surprised if something just jumps out and decides to beat me over the head like that. Anyways, so let's talk about Undertale structurally a little bit here. I talked about visual storytelling, I talked about why we're doing it. The first episode, which will be going live in about 100 minutes, give or take, is very short. In fact, here, let me get you some exact numbers here. This is all on purpose, though. This is part of the construction. I sectioned the chapters out. There's 5 chapters total. I sectioned the chapters out very specifically. Sorry, give me one moment. It's taking a moment to load. It's on the archive hard drive, so it's got to spit up first. Here we go. So chapter 1, the one we'll be seeing today, is pretty short. It is, of course it's not going to tell me, 31 minutes and 41 seconds long. Pretty short, right? In fact, it's one of the shortest theater sections I've ever done. That works very well, though. It's a very dense chapter. There's very little dead time, very little gameplay sequencing throughout that. Chapter 2, which will be going live next week, is, dramatic pause, 1 hour and 10 minutes. Chapter 3 is 1 hour and 25 minutes. Chapter 4 is 1 hour and 47 minutes. Chapter 5 is 3 hours and 4 minutes. Now, if you're paying attention, it's doing that, almost literally. And that is very much on purpose, and that is very much planned for. Again, this is part of the pre-planning phase. This is partially because of the nature of how Undertale functions as a story. Anybody who's played Undertale knows this, so forgive me for the repetition. But Undertale is... Most stories are establishment and then payoff, at least most good stories. But Undertale, the first 4 chapters, while there's some cool stuff and there's some cool moments, ultimately all of them all just serve to build the building blocks for Chapter 5. All of that is designed to hold up Chapter 5 and push Chapter 5 up. And Chapter 5 would not be anywhere near significant if not for the previous 4 chapters. So it's kind of like this, to put it simply. So here's Chapter 5, and here's the 4 chapters under it. Without this, this wouldn't work, and without this, this would be meaningless. So I designed this pretty specifically in order to line it up like this, because I wanted that kind of implication of escalation literally as the viewer's watching it, in addition to the fact that I wanted people to feel invested, I guess is the weirdest way to put that. Now, that being said, I didn't actually want... It's funny, Larry. I didn't want to do quite as far of a divide, but as usual, I'm kind of limited by what the actual game is. So I'll go ahead and tell you, Chapter 1 ends when we leave the ruins. The tutorial. Now, again, that's an extremely dense section, so that makes sense. And, of course, Chapter 1 is devoted towards tutorial. Go figure. Chapter 2 ends after we leave the Snowden area. Chapter 2 is devoted entirely to papyrus and sands. Moving past Chapter 3, Chapter 3 ends when we enter Alphys' lab in Hotland. Chapter 3 is devoted almost entirely to Undyne, although there's a few other things there as well. Chapter 4 is kind of a strange one, because Chapter 4 doesn't follow the pattern of most of them as well. Chapter 4 starts when we meet Alphys, and ends when we go to the final area, New Home, in order to confront Asgore. And Chapter 4 is primarily focused on Alphys and Mettaton. Therefore, logically, the only character who hasn't shown up at all, not counting one little side bit, you'd think that Chapter 5 is devoted entirely towards Asgore. But after analyzing it, I think that Chapter 5 is more devoted towards everyone. Because Alfie's Asgore, Flowey, the final boss, and also everyone else all get a fairly large amount of screen time and a fair amount of establishment. This is also the other challenge I had. So I had a choice when it came to constructing this, and I did decide to do it. Anybody who's watched this obviously know, they've been working on this, already knows this. I decided, for those of you not aware, at the end of Undertale, after you've beaten the final boss, there's a section which is a playable outro, effectively. And you can go back and walk through the whole game, no encounters anymore, and just talk to all the NPCs throughout the entire game. Now, to me, of course I would do that. That makes sense. They all say stuff differently, and there's all sorts of acknowledgement of stuff. There's jokes, there's story connections, there's world building, etc., etc. So, of course, I did that. If you're paying attention, this is pretty similar to the Paper Mario 2 construction. Everyone has lines within their chapter, and everyone has lines in the final chapter. Same concept. This is part of why Chapter 5 is so long. In fact, the actual original recording was gargantuan. It was, of course, edited down for time because editing. But, oh my god. I think the original recording for Chapter 5 was something like 6 hours long. No screw-ups. Didn't have to do any retakes. Which is good, because by that point, oh my gosh. So yeah, that was edited down a little bit for time. I've learned a lot of editing tricks doing this, by the way. And one trick, which I'm actually sick of doing, is I learned how to bring the text down into time with the dialogue. So for those of you not aware, when I'm recording, what I'm doing is I'm speaking the words out loud roughly how I expect them to be voiced as director, right? That gives me the timing. Now, one of the most consistent complaints I got with the FF9 Theater was I didn't give people enough time to do their lines. So this time around, what I did was I spoke the line and then I would wait for a full 1 second beat before advancing the dialogue. That turned out to be terrible, because what ended up happening is the lines were perfectly timed, except then there'd be the second beat. And so the pacing of the dialogue was awful. So I'm like, okay, how do I solve this? Well, turns out Undertale is a little bit easier to edit than something like FF9 with regards to this, probably because of the nature of its music and its visuals. So what I would do is I would count 11 frames after the previous thing, which is enough to give me a leeway period. And then from those 11 frames, I would eyeball it, because you just kind of get used to it after a while, and then chop that section out entirely, and then do a particular form of gradient move between the two so that it looks like nothing has happened. It looks like they're just speaking normally. So a chunk of dialogue that's like this, with giant pauses in it, becomes a chunk of dialogue like this. Now, of course, I didn't just pull out all pauses, because normal human speech has pauses, natural cadence to it. The catch is, this is one of the reasons why this has taken this long, despite being so relatively shorter than FF9, because I had to sit through every line of dialogue in the game after the first 3 editing passes and figure out the cadence and timing of each line. I already have some ideas for the next theater to avoid this problem, but all I'm going to say is we're going to avoid that 1 second thing entirely. We're just going to kick that out. That's not happening. Yep, every time I hear your character's lines, I go into violent rage. It's horrible. One moment, please. Oh my goodness. I feel terrible. I'm excited. Hey, Dr. Winter. One of the other things with this particular one, I think I've already kind of hinted at this, I became more comfortable with editing it, with adding stuff to it, with trying to mess with the game to show the story that I think it should, effectively. Editing the game, for lack of a better way to put it. This kind of also ties into the whole meta-narrative thing I mentioned earlier, because Undertale is supposed to be a game about choices, which means we had to choose the specific path. Oh, and for some reason I keep getting this question, no, we didn't do the genocide route. What's wrong with you? Why would you? Anyways, so um, there's several small tidbits and sections where the dialogue, where there's added dialogue, or there's slightly variant dialogue, or it doesn't really quite match what's going on screen, or there's additional little tidbits of audible reactions. One of my favorites is there's this bit where Kitsune Baba, who is voicing Undyne, is like, thunk. And she actually did voice acting. She did audio snippets for each one of those little movements in order to coincide with the timing of it. You know, stuff like that, right? No, I have not, Trihexia. My first playthrough of this game was a pacifist run. I'm actually rather proud of that, if I might be so bold. Because what happened, I'll go ahead and tell you that story since we're here. So the first time we ever streamed Undertale, we weren't even reviewing it or anything. We were just like, okay, go play Undertale. I'm like, okay, sure. And I was super paranoid the whole time, but people kept telling me this is a game of choices. So I was like, alright, well, there's two ways we can do this. I can play this game as myself, role-playing as myself, or I can let you decide what I do. And everyone voted, and you voted for me to go ahead and play as myself. At point in fact, I got through... There was only one point of the game I really got stuck on, and that was Asgore, because, you know, I wasn't killing him, and you're supposed to. It was the one time you're supposed to actually fight, and I wasn't fighting. I was like, really? Come on! The whole game... Anyways. It's actually funny, if you think about the construction of the game in general. I know I've talked about this before. It starts off being really easy to do a... really easy to do a pacifist playthrough and really hard to do a genocide playthrough. And the further into the game you get, the harder it becomes to do pacifist, and the easier it becomes to do genocide. And it was just like... I'm pretty sure that's on purpose, too. I'm pretty sure it's constructed that way, deliberately. Anyways. God, I feel terrible. I'm sorry. I swear I had all sorts of stuff planned to talk about. I guess I've already talked about quite a bit. We've been talking like 30 minutes now. Well, I mean, the fight is hardest, but that's not what I meant, Frieza. It's... By the time you're at the end, it's easiest to keep doing that because there's not really any other options, right? Once you get to the Sans fight, you're locked in. So it's the easiest thing possible because you actually have to fight him. By contrast, you can abort the genocide route at any time prior to that. No, I'm sick. I'm super sick. I've been sick for the last couple of days. Oh, the genocide run is super boring. There's just... Ugh. The genocide route... I mean, okay, so... First of all, I'm never doing a genocide route, ever. Ever. But second of all, it is very grinding and very boring. And you're pretty much doing it in order to be able to access the two bonus fights. The one with Undyne and the one with Sans. That's pretty much the benefit of that. Yeah, I'm never doing that. Don't even ask. Not for this, not for a review if we ever do it, not for nothing. Who's a more difficult fight, Sans or Flowey? Sans is a much harder fight. Flowey's not all that hard of a fight, although I nearly screwed up the Photoshop Flowey fight once. One screw up in the whole time. I was having... I'm not super good at this, and for some reason, I'm sure I could fix this problem now, but when I was recording this, I couldn't get my controller working for the game. So everything you're seeing me do it on the keyboard. Just using the arrow keys. That led to some interesting moments, because I don't know about you guys, I'm not super precise with the arrow keys. So, yeah, anyways, couple screw-ups. I've streamed, actually, Deltarune Chapter 1, but we're not touching the rest of it until all 5 chapters are out. Hey, 5 chapters, that's appropriate. Yeah, the true Tao Hao path. I mean, you know... I also have to say, if I might be so bold... FF9 Theater was, like, awesome. And I mean that. It was awesome. It was incredible. It was amazing. Having had to go through over the last couple of weeks to polish and master the Undertale Theater, I actually think the Undertale Theater is better. I am blown away by some of the performances we have here. I am shocked at how this one turned out, how good it turned out. I don't mean to hype it up. It's just this is me being surprised, if that makes any sense. I mean, yeah, we all figured out more. I figured out more as a producer and a director and an editor. And so many of the other people have figured out more. Oh yeah, fun little side note. Random, Bragwin, and myself are the only people who voice characters in all 3 theaters we've done so far. Just random little tidbit there. We're the OGs. Mostly because not a lot of people were involved in Paper Mario. Hey look, it's Stronger Monsters. Where does this song play? Well, whose fault is that, Maverick? One of the things I like to do for these is I like to have a special outro, a special credits section. In Paper Mario 2... Actually, you know what? I can just show you, can't I? Hang on. My favorite voice I've played? Honestly, the voice I am most proud of is Nightingale. So, thank you very much for the sub, as always. Unfortunately, I am not a puppy person. I'm not a dog person, so I have no idea. If anybody in chat knows any tips for you, they can hopefully help you on that. And if you know what game you'd like to put them towards, please let me know. I know, right, Shikor? It's frickin' Paper Mario 2. It's a really, really, really fun, good game. Actually, were you in Paper Mario 2, Meridian? Oh, hang on, I'm pulling it up now. Clicker training? What the heck is clicker training? Yeah, Paper Mario 2 is an amazing game. Just mind-blowingly good. Hang on, I'm double-checking. Because I'm going to show you something anyways. Oh my goodness. I was so disorganized about my file structure back in Paper Mario 2. I mean, I've thought about it, Random. If nothing else, I'd like to at least do Paper Mario 1, which isn't as good of a game, but... I mean, hey, Valerian. Hang on a second. This is actually kind of frustrating. I'm just going to pull up my YouTube. I'm just going to do it here. Paper Mario 2 Theater. You got it, Nightingale. Give me a second. Oh. A dry spot in my back of my throat, which is a really bad thing to get, if anybody's ever experienced that. No, I could die now. It's cool. Theater's done. It's all set up and ready to go. Shut up past me. Okay. We're at Lorewalker Theater. Okay. Chapter 8. So this is gonna be a weird way to do this. Listen, I'm kind of busy. I ain't got time to bleed. Alright. Let's see if we can pull this up proper like, shall we? Doing it old-fashioned style. Whoop. There we go. Hi, Tessie. Or Tara. Sorry. Sorry. Let's go ahead and pause this and unmute this.
Took me. But
Let's mute me. I don't want to hear that. That's a terrible voice actor. Oh yeah, someone asked me what my favorite line is. So the dialogue that I wrote that I am most proud of in terms of editing, because there's two different things there, is the Soul Cage in chapter 8 or 9. I forget which. One of them. Towards the end there. But in all honesty, the line that the role that I am most proud of doing overall is probably Garland. That was an interesting and fascinating challenge, and I had to inflict a lot of different emotions while simultaneously destroying my throat to do so. Okay, so this is what I did for Paper Mario 2. It's kind of crude, I'll be honest, but it was just me trying to go ahead and have, you know, some kind of visual representation of what people did. So there's Bragwin, of course. Darkrai, who recently came back, so she's doing good, which is really nice to hear. Deutsch, who has not. Hopefully they're doing right. Wait a minute, was Little Billy in that? Was Little Billy in Undertale? I'm not actually sure. I can just look that up. Whoops! That's a mistake. Whatever. There's Random. Actually did a whole bunch of NPCs, go figure. It was the Proto-Maverick, if you will. Apparently Rax is in all three as well. And there's Zed Slayer, you were right. So never mind, we've got several OGs. So we've got Random, Rax, Zed Slayer, Bragwin, me. Notice I didn't even credit myself. I did so many characters in Paper Mario 2. I didn't even list all of them. There was just way too many lists. But that's how I did that in Paper Mario 2. Now in FF9, of course, I'm not going to bore you with this, but I had a very, very long thing. Yeah, Rax got one line in Undertale. He got one of the Chapter 5 narrations, because I was really trying to get different people to do the Chapter 5 narrations, as I already mentioned. So I pulled in Rax, and I pulled in my sister, and I pulled in Third to help flesh that out. This video went live 4 years ago. Wow. I mean, that makes sense. October 5th, 2017. It's always October for some reason. Ironically, something just occurred to me. So Paper Mario, we did Chapter 0, Chapter 1, and then 2. Pretty sure it's 2. And then I put it down for like an inordinate amount of time. Like a huge amount of time. And then I was like, you know what? I feel like finishing it off. And I came back, and the difference is stark because I never went back and redid Chapter 0, 1, or 2. So some characters change voice actors, and the entire visual style of the game changes. In fact, we completely changed what we were capturing the video from. So I actually had to play back up to the part where we were at in a whole new environment in order to capture the new footage. And I'm amused by that because that means that both Paper Mario 2 and Final Fantasy 9 both had a moment where we paused the game for huge chunks of time, months upon months upon months, and then picked it back up again. No such issue with Undertale. Undertale has been a pretty smooth production overall, as far as productions go. Now, hang on. I was just asked. So let's look up our Undertale credits here. Let's pull this up. So Random, I think Random or Kitsune Baba or Mr. Red. Those are the big three for this one. But let's count here, shall we? So Kitsune Baba does 1, 2, 9, 10, 14 characters. Mr. Red does 1, 2, 12 characters. And Random does 17 characters. There you go. Random wins. Random. It's funny. You were like our NPC dude back in Paper Mario 2, and then you came back to be our NPC dude. You did a good job of everything. I was pretty happy with all of it. So it's some good stuff. Yes, you are the Maverick of Undertale. I mentioned goals, right? my goal with FF9 was to do it, to actually have people interested. My goal with Undertale was for me to not voice anyone. My goal with the next one, which we're not going to talk about just yet, I'm still kind of keeping that quiet. I actually have a teaser for it built into the credits of Undertale, just like I did with the previous one. But the next one, my goal is for nobody to repeat, to do more characters. I want everyone to only voice one character each. I don't know if we're going to pull that off, but that's the general goal there for the next one. Several people only voiced one person here. Like Berenian voiced 2 people, Blue Wind voices 2 people, Cadet Wentz White Swan voices 2 people. Yeah, Kitsune Baba. What's ironic, don't mistake this, you did a wonderful job as Toriel. You really did. You nailed it. And I cannot gush enough about so many of the voice actors in this one. But long after you'd already finished all your lines as Toriel, Ryokami got a hold of me again because she had kind of fallen off the map a bit there. And she was like, hey, do you need anybody? I was like, I wish I'd had you a few months ago because I would have asked her to do Toriel. Ryokami, for those of you who don't remember, voiced Freya in Final Fantasy IX, so we know she's good. Shrug, what can you do? I wonder if actual professional production people run into these same kind of problems with regards to getting a hold of actors and actresses, It's like, hey, I need you to do this, and they're not responding. Okay. Well, we'll make do with this. Hey, I'm ready. Where were you? Because I imagine that happens at least a little bit, right? It depends on how it sounds, Tara. I mean, I know that sounds strange, but let me put it this way. I don't care as long as A, you're happy with it, obviously, and B, the finished product sounds good, right? Like, as the finished product doesn't sound bad. I don't have a better way to phrase that. So, sure, why not? I mean, I thought you did a good job back in FF9, but that's just me. No, you did good, Doctor. Who'd you voice? Scroll down a little bit. You voiced Wims a lot too. I actually had several people who just grabbed one character and did something with it. What's really funny is most of our major characters are only voiced by by the person who do it. So Frieza is our Flowey voice, and that's it. Killing You does Papyrus, and then 2 other one-offs. Walker, I know, does Asgore, for example. And Primarch does Sans, and no one else. There's a couple like that. Blue Wind was... Blue Wind. So Blue Wind was our second pick when it came to Alphys. And there's no nice way to say that. Blue Wind does a good job of it, don't mistake me. I'm actually quite happy with Blue Wind's performance as Alphys. The problem was, it was originally supposed to be Platy. Platy, I actually have lines from Platy that I still have on the computer of her doing Alphys lines. In fact, when I was going in to edit Chapter 4, which is when Alphys shows up, I had already slotted in some of her lines into the episode. And so I was going through, once Blue Wind had submitted all her lines, and was kind of starting putting them in, I was just like, oh. Yeah, that sucked. I know I said this with FF9, but I say this yet again. I'm actually really upset. I know it's such a dumb reason. It's like the final sprinkles on top of the pile of garbage that is her death. But I wish she had been able to participate. I wish she'd been able to see it go live. Anyways, how many roles did I end up putting Lorewalker for? Let me look here. 5 roles for you, Lorewalker. I put you as 2 characters I probably shouldn't have, but it's okay. They sound distinct enough. You do a good job of varying your voice up, so that worked out. And yeah, Berenian, I know you're in this one because you voiced Spider 5 and Dummy 3. I think I already said that. It's so funny. So the way I organize, I guess I could show you this. Why not? Here, let's give you a little bit of a behind-the-scenes insight. So I've got a spreadsheet, right? As you can see, because it's on your screen right now. And the whole idea is, this color coordination doesn't matter right now, but this is the categories of roles. Difficult role, major role, medium role, minor role, one-off role. And the whole point of this is the higher up the color, the more picky I'm going to be, the more I require from it, right? Whereas this is just literally a one-off. And a one-off is exactly what it sounds like. It is one line of dialogue. This is someone who probably doesn't have a lot of lines, maybe 2 or 3. But they usually have lines of dialogue across chapters. This is someone who has at least a medium role, like most of the shopkeepers would qualify as this. Major role is obvious. This is someone who has multiple lines across multiple chapters, and the difficult roles is also obvious. And of course, these are all linked. I know you can't really see that, but all these link to the actual chapters and the actual theater notes and the director notes. And then we have the people and the characters they voice, and I color code it. Purple means it's done, so that person can then know that that's done. This is how I do it. So I sort this out. This is kind of a new invention. The FF9 sheet wasn't quite this organized. Again, I wanted to have pretty much everything done before I ever took voice actors. This is one of the mistakes I made with FF9. So for those of you who weren't there for that, when I started FF9, so the whole process is plan, record, raw edit, notations, direction, and then spreadsheet, so that the actors can know where their lines are and what to do with them, and then we get lines in. So that's step 7 is people actually submitting lines, right? But with FF9, I was still in the process of recording, which is step 2, when I was already taking auditions. Now, obviously this makes sense at the time, because I was like, oh my god, nobody wants to do the theater because Paper Mario 2, please, please, please get involved. So it made sense to me at the time, but it was a disorganized mess and led to a lot of issues. It's one of the reasons why we had to recast so many people, is because we got in some people, and I didn't have chapter 5 or 9 or 13 recorded yet, because I was still back in chapter 2. I was playing catch-up. And that was horrible. So instead with Undertale, all 5 chapters were planned, recorded, edited, notated, directed, and timed, and put into the spreadsheet before I ever started accepting auditions, which is exactly what I intend to do with the next game, by the way. I've already finished storyboarding the next game in my head. I already know exactly how I'm going to do it, what I'm going to do with it, which I suppose brings me to my next thing. I know I've actually talked about this before, but I figured this is a good time to talk about it since it's relevant to the topic at hand, and not everyone maybe has heard this. So one of the things I'm thinking about doing with the next one, yeah, exactly, Pitkiss. One of the things I'm thinking of doing, oh, I forgot the music, sorry. With the next one is I want to add dialogue to the game that isn't there. Now, so I'm going to use the same example I used the last time I talked about this, which is Chrono Trigger. So imagine for a moment that you're going through a dungeon in Chrono Trigger. Yes, we're going to do Alien... Valerian, don't tell them! So imagine you're going through... so those of you who played Chrono Trigger, we're going through 2300 AD, right? You're going through the dungeon, and... I just realized I can actually show you this. Hang on. Maybe I can't, because that's going to be there, isn't it? Okay, whatever. Point being, as you're going through 2300 AD, you're going through this ruined area and maybe adding, not all the time, because it's going to be kind of tricky. It's going to be on me to be both a good writer and a good director to do this. But I have a little bit more confidence in my abilities to try this. The idea is there's going to be more banter. People just kind of chatting as they're going through the dungeon, or reacting to events that are happening, or reacting to random battles, that kind of a thing. And another thing I want to do is I want to add some bits of dialogue for enemies, who obviously don't have dialogue otherwise, and most importantly, add dialogue for bosses. So to use Chrono Trigger as the example again, some of you may remember that there's a boss at the end of the 2300 AD first section, which is called the Guardian, and it has 2 bits on either side, right? So I was thinking of something like, so there's the Guardian, and it actually has lines in the game, initiating defense protocol, stuff like that, right? But I was thinking of adding then lines for bit 1 and bit 2. So they could be kind of doing their own little things like, and have them like initiating counter response, alpha, beta, or whatever, and just adding those little snippets to try and flesh it out more. I mean, I've thought about that, Dakota, because what I'm talking about is effectively the, what do they call that? The vignettes from the Tales of series. And in fact, I can mix and match if I wanted to. So one thing I could do, let's use Chrono Trigger as the example again. One thing I could do, it's okay, Evo, I understand. You secretly hate me. It's too late now. It's all done. If I died today from sickness, the theater's going live. Show's going on. But anyways, what I could do is, let's go back to the aforementioned examples. So we've got Chrono, Marl, and Luca. That's the party at that moment, right? So they're going through that dungeon. And as they're going through, what I could do, while I'm recording, I could move up and then stop and then turn left. And have them overlooking the devastation, right? How horribly damaged it looks. And then I could just leave that there for however many seconds I need to with raw footage. And then afterwards, in post, add a little pop-up thing and have their faces show up. Blah, 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 blah. Switch to Marl's face. Blah, 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 blah. Switch to Lucas' face. Blah, 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 blah. Switch back to blah, blah, blah. And actually do a full vignette and just put that on top of the raw footage of the game. Another thing I could do is more live stuff. So, one of the things that happens, it's, again, using the same dungeon, because why not, is there's this little rat you have to chase, and it has the password in order to be able to progress. So maybe make a thing as they're chasing after the rat, having little snippets of, you tricked me, and just have little vocal tidbits as they're trying to chase this rat. So that's stuff that's happening live as the game's playing. I can use both of these in order to try and add to the game in question. So that's the general goal with that. Like I said, I've already done most of the storyboarding in my head, and I've already kind of got an idea for what kind of voices I want for certain characters and certain enemies and certain bosses. I will admit, I don't want to give away too much, but I will admit that the next game I'm looking at to do a theater on is going to be a substantially smaller project, despite the fact that I'm being more ambitious about it, because, oh my god, because FF9 and Undertale have both been an absolutely enormous task. Huge undertaking. And yeah, here's the Chapter 5 narration music. Yeah, I need a little bit of a break. In fact, so I don't want to create the fact that I haven't even announced the next theater should probably tell you that we're going to have a little bit of a pause in between the Undertale theater and the next one. Yeah, no, I don't want to make people think that we're going to do theaters back to back to back, because that's insanity. Nevertheless, I am very happy about Undertale going live. Speaking of which, that actually reminds me of something else. So anybody who's already done the math has probably already figured out that Chapter 5 should be going live on Christmas Day. Now, that is actually on purpose. I'm not sure if it's going to be a finalized thing, though, because I'm not actually sure what my schedule is on Christmas Day yet. Listen, Valerian, I will go ahead and pause. Take a breather. Okay, I'm good. Let's do it. Aw, I'm sorry, Nightingale. I know what that feels like, actually. But yes, it is supposed to go live on Christmas. I might not be available on Christmas Day. We'll see. If I'm not, I'll probably just push it out, because that'll put it on to something else, which I definitely haven't heard of me. That'll push it out to New Year's. And both of those are acceptable. New Year's and Christmas Day are both acceptable for that. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. Either way, that's the schedule for that one. And I do want to do the live commentary, like I always do. I have so many notes to share about this one. Like I said, from a production standpoint, this one was... it was a thing. Yeah. Anyways. Now, Doom's... yes, we're playing Doom. That's why I have to add voice acting, because there's no voice acting in Doom. There's no dialogue in Doom. But it's okay, because you'll be adding dialogue. Now, Zedslayer, I need you to play Doom Guy. So I want you to sound as growly as possible. And I want you... okay, so give me your best... okay, now I need a... okay, now you've just been hit by shots of superheated plasma, okay? Now I want you to imagine... you can't actually feel any pain, because what's happening is your nerve endings are being fried before they can send a signal. But as it's going through, you acknowledge that it's going through, and it's like, oh my gosh, I've just been shot by plasma. So I need that kind of a reaction to that kind of a moment, okay? Also, blood is coming out your eyes the entire time. I'm not sure what's going on without that. That's just kind of weird. And yeah, the Cyber Demon... I'm going to quote that, Valerian. "What ho, yon Doom Guy, if thou wishest to defeat thine legions of hell, thou must solveth mine puzzles 3 first." We're also going to do a Pac-Man theater. It's going to be extremely short. It's one chapter. And what it's going to be... okay, real talk. I was thinking about doing a Pac-Man theater as a April Fool's joke a couple of years ago, actually. And it was just going to be, waka, waka, waka. And I was going to have somebody saying, waka, waka, waka. And then I was going to die like 3 seconds in. And that was just it. That's the video. Credits! You know. One of the other ones I was thinking about doing for an April Fool's thing was a Chrono Trigger tidbit. And you're probably thinking, but don't you want to do Chrono Trigger someday? Oh, absolutely. But I want Chrono Trigger... So, my favorite type of April Fool's is a joke that has a degree of sincerity to it. So I was going to announce the Chrono Trigger Theater in like in a completely joking, terrible way and have just the worst voice acting for everybody. But we were actually going to do a Chrono Trigger Theater. You know, something like that. Obviously, I haven't done that yet because Chrono Trigger, as well as Final Fantasy VI, are being pushed out. I want to learn more, I want to grow more, and ideally it'd be nice to have access to more equipment and more resources to do more, but we'll see if that actually happens. I don't know. That might never happen. But nevertheless. Now... Oh god. Chaos something, I think, Zenslayer? Something like that. Trying to find it. Give me a second. Can't seem to find it. Nah. Whatever. There it is. Yeah, Chaos Wars. There it is. And actually, yeah, Chaos Wars. Oh my god. Chaos Wars just has... Oh yeah, well, that's it. That's it. We'll do Quest 64. I will admit, so I'll go ahead and admit this. So Random has a list here of things we'll do someday. Now, obviously RPGs fit the theater quite well. In fact, if you're paying attention, all 3 theaters we've done so far are for RPGs. Although Undertale's kind of questionable. High hazardous. The point is, RPGs are cool. The song that might play when you play sets. Sure. I kind of want to branch out a bit and do games that are not RPGs. Like, I look at this list here, and we got Super Paper Mario, Final Fantasy IV, Final Fantasy V, Chrono Trigger, Earthbound, Final Fantasy VI. Yeah. Lots and lots of RPGs, right? But obviously, I do want to branch out. That's kind of another one of my little quiet goals. And there's a few games I've been thinking about bouncing around in my head a little bit for things that will work. One thing that we've actually already discussed, which is on the list, is the Ace Attorney Trilogy. Now, that one would be interesting. What I would be more inclined to do is probably do Ace Attorney 1 and see how that works before we actually go forwards. Because, yeah, Ace Attorney has an inordinate amount of dialogue. It has a huge amount of text in it. I mean, the FF9 had a lot of text, but no. Ace Attorney is just text. It's just text, 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 text. It's just nonstop. So, that's going to be difficult. And, of course, I'm going to be really picky about people who voice several of the major characters, including, like, for example, Phoenix himself. Yeah, not many characters either. So there's going to be a whole... But just there's not really much of a concept of a one-off in Ace Attorney, right? Everyone is at least doing a major role. Everyone. Even if they're only there for one particular case, they're going to be there for quite a while. Not necessarily. I don't know why my cadence was wrong there. Not necessarily, Evo. In fact, I know for a fact people have voiced for both Paper Mario 2, Final Fantasy IX, and Undertale who have not actually played those games. So that's not too thing. But yeah, lots of recurring people and lots of lines. So that would be a very different and very difficult thing. And that's part of why I'm hesitant on it. And that's why I'd say I would probably just do the first game as kind of a test bed and see how that works out. That is definitely what I'm thinking about, though. I've already put some thought into that. Obviously, you know, the other Paper Marios are a thing we could do. Someone suggested Monkey Island. I'm not sure what I think of that one. No voice actor experience. That's actually not a bad idea, Chaotic Tony. We could literally do a test case, of literally doing the very first case, the tutorial case, which is a good case in Ace Attorney 1. It's not a terrible idea. I'm so glad that they started doing this bass thing after I finished all my recording, by the way. Metal Gear... So, one thing I've thought about... some games already either have voice acting, both either minor or major, and so that's one of the things I've been debating when it comes to future games. A game where we can just eject the voice acting layer is something that's at least feasible to do, right? Unfortunately, not every game has that separate audio slider for voice acting, which sucks. But if there is such a game where we could just turn off the voice acting entirely, that would make that substantially more doable, because what I'd have to do otherwise is I'd have to reconstruct every scene manually, which I can do. I have done it. In fact, there are 5 scenes in Undertale where the audio you're listening to is 100% manually crafted. I had to actually grab audio clips of the that plays when they talk, and the music, and the sound effects in order to just actually recreate chunks of scenes, because I had some audio glitch or another, right? And it's doable. And yeah, then there's games that are partially voiced. One that keeps coming to my mind is Final Fantasy IV, the DS version, obviously. But there's also, as you say, Pillars of Eternity 1. One that occurred to me was actually Neverwinter Nights, although that might be a little bit too much as well. I agree, Hazardous. This is Walker's theme, right here. Yeah, Tactics Ogre was one I was thinking about, too. Actually, one I was really thinking about was Final Fantasy Tactics. Because the way... So, this is going to sound stupid, but there's a way to do purple prose properly. And in no way do I mean an insult by this, but not every actor can do that, right? Not everyone knows how to make that sound good. But I was really loving the idea of doing a Final Fantasy Tactics run. The catch there is everyone would have to be able to do that purple prose, because they all talk like that. All of them speak in that manner. Yeah, administered. Oh my god, I can't talk. Sorry, I'm sick. I'm recovering. What do you want from me? Can't even talk right now. Hang on, let me actually pull up Final Fantasy Tactics right now. We'll pull up the PSP version, because that's the version I'd be using. So, for example, one thing Ramza says is, "It is you who does not understand, brother. All of this war has been plotted out by some unseen purposes. Dukes Larg and Goltana only puppets in some shadow play. The legends of your holy Arasite are lies. The stones are magicite. They hold in them power for evil. The Cardinal used this power and perverted it into one of the Lucavi." Or, "You think to save a princess from a burning tower. In truth, you would but set her upon a higher floor. There's only one person who could truly save her, and that is what I mean to do." Or, "You, no less human than we?" Now there's a beastly thought. "You've been less than we from the moment your base-born father fell upon your mother in whatever gutter you were sired. You've been chattel since you came into the world drenched in common blood." And so forth and so on. There's a bunch of examples. I'm gonna skip this song. It's not quite... It is Shakespearean in style. That is the overall approach. "What troubled sleep have you known to speak of my dreams? No matter how sweet, a dream left unrealized must fade into day. Only with power can dreams be made real. I see the truth of it now. What good dreams without that power? You think me a thrall? So be it. Your envenomed words succor me, for when at last you yield, as you must, their poison will consume you." And so forth and so on. It's not... sometimes they overdo it, sometimes they don't. But you get the idea. That is the kind of dialogue that everyone says. Everyone speaks like that in that game. Even just, one-off characters. And there's not a lot of one-off characters in Final Fantasy Tactics either. Most of the one-offs are the characters who join us for a chapter and then leave the narrative after that. Like, What's-Her-Face, the most badass bodyguard in the game, or What's-His-Face, the machinist, who I can't think of either of their names right now. I can't think of any of his names. Is it actually listed here? No, of course it doesn't. Agrius and Mystadian, thank you. Oh my goodness. And yeah, Dakota is correct. Every now and again, random NPCs will say just a random quote, either when they're attacking, when they're casting, or when they're dying. So those would be most of the one-offs in something like Final Fantasy Tactics. The real thing that's limiting me from Final Fantasy Tactics is the gameplay. So, obviously part of the theater is the gameplay axis. I just talked about that. One of the things I did a lot of is in Undertale is trying to emphasize the gameplay aspect of things to do visual storytelling. And it's something I plan to do the next time as well. Final Fantasy Tactics' gameplay doesn't lend itself towards this medium at all. It's very slow and very plodding. It would drag the narrative down to a crawl. So that leaves us with a couple of options. The first is we could skip over the gameplay entirely, which is something I'm not in favor of. The second thing is we could cheat our balls off, but then it would be obvious, and again, it's not something I'm in favor of. Remember when we did the Final Fantasy Tactics lore run, and we had the cheat that gave Ramza like 255 speed? Wouldn't really want to do that either. The best I've come up with, and this is just completely off my top of my head, is to do exactly what Chaotic Danny just said. To slice the battle into highlights. To have like, wha-cha, and then fireball, and then doing this thing, and then cut to the end of it. And have basically 3 to 5 scenes, 3 to 5 snippets per battle. And then just get onto it, right? Now, even that has issues, because what that effectively means is I would either have to cheat and then just accept the cheat stuff in the middle of it, even though it doesn't work that way for Final Fantasy Tactics. Or, much worse, I would have to not cheat and just do the battles the slow way, which I'm much less inclined to do. So, while Final Fantasy Tactics sounds like a fun one, there's no good answer there. There's just various compromises. Yeah, exactly, Dakota. So it's like, ugh. So that's why that one's not even one I'm really thinking about too much, because as much as it would be nice, actually executing that is going to be a colossal pain. Now, Final Fantasy V? I mean, most of the FFs we could do pretty smoothly. We've got the Pixel Remaster now, so that's not an issue. And we could go ahead and try to do what I was talking about earlier, adding dialogue to the game. So let's use FF5 as an example. So you're going through, the pirate area, and you hear this guy in the background snoring, to hear the pirate dude, or you end up fighting the, I don't know, let me think of an example here. You fight the Siren boss, and she actually has dialogue during the boss fight, stuff like that. How would I do the jobs? So, that's a good question, actually. Well, Quest for Glory exists, but I don't know much about it, so I can't speak to that. I don't think I've ever even played that game. Let's Google this real quick. Quest for Glory. Let's see. Quest for Glory. This is one of the old Sierra games, I'm guessing? It is. Well, I've never played this, so I can't speak to it. But adventure games are something that is at least something I've considered. Ghost Trick has been mentioned several times, mostly yesterday, as a possibility. The same general idea as Ace Attorney. And with a guide, that would be pretty smooth to do as well. But Ace Attorney and Ghost Trick would both have the same general problem. Lots and lots and lots of lines of dialogue for a relatively small cast. Would I do FF7? So I've actually talked about this with Lore Reloaded, of all people, because he suggested FF7 as a theater target. He said, you know, it's FF7, he loves it, everybody loves it, people will be invested, people will be cool, everything's cool. The biggest problem with doing FF7 is, first of all, we'd have to do the original, obviously. Which isn't the worst thing to do, except for the dialogue in FF7 is terrible. Remember how I complained about FF9's dialogue? FF7's dialogue is so much worse. I know everyone memes on some of the little, you know, misspellings or grammatical errors, but the further into FF7 you get, the more the dialogue is not English. I demonstrated this during the review, where I was voicing the lines out loud and really showcasing how that's not English at all. That's just not language at a certain point. It's terrible. And yeah, so we'd be competing with the abridged versions, of which there's 2 that I know of, and we'd be competing with the remake. So while there's obviously an appeal there, the biggest obstacle by far to FF7 would actually be I'd have to get a hold of my own ROM editor for FF7, and I'd have to rewrite the whole script manually. Now, that's possible. It's a hell of a lot of work, though. And that's basically adding another step in the 7 steps before we get to actually getting lines in. That being said, if we ever actually do Final Fantasy VI, I plan to do exactly that. So I've been debating back and forth. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and throw together an actual audition list, random, which I've never done before. I've mostly just said, here's the spreadsheet. And all I distinguish is this is a male character, this is a female character, and this character's gender doesn't matter. And those are 3 categories. Pick something and go for it. But, yes, it did, Azadus. I did. In fact, actually, I can show that right now. I've got that ready to go. You have to give me a minute to find it, because it's a separate thing. Maybe? It has to be this one. It's weird, Hazardous, how that works out. Oh, excuse me. Yeah, I know it's behind the thing, whatever. Actually, I can push it forwards. Oh, I have it muted, don't I? What's really funny about doing anything like this is I effectively have to decide if and how I emulate it. Obviously, emulation is superior for several reasons. In fact, I've already done test runs to figure out how I would use save states to capture scenes. The way you do it is you do a save state, which is called the anchor, and then you do a second save state, which is called the reverse. So then you reload to the anchor, and then do the reverse, and that's when you actually do the scene transition. I know that sounds strange, but what I mean by that is, if you do a save state, it's going to be really obvious that it's been loaded. So you do those 2 save states and differentiate them. Anytime you know you're going to do a load state, that way people will actually be able to not see the difference. They won't see the transition. And you do the cut in the middle of the 2 save states to the new version. I probably explained that terribly, but trust me, it works. Like I said, I've already done test cases of this. One thing I've also been thinking about is I don't want to pigeonhole my actors too much. If they want to try out something new or something different, I'm totally down for that. You know, I don't want to typecast anybody. which chord just reminded me of. Well, here's the test. Hard to believe I'm actually editing Final Fantasy VI, you know? Maybe this can be used just like the D-Link. I don't know what that is. I know, right? We'll see how far we can stretch this. I wonder what happens if I put this here. I think that's weird. Try this. Also, elemental symbols are apparently something you can put in the text. Alright, I think it's a good time to test the paragraph limit. 1,000 years may have passed, but I think it's time we destroy all civilizations so the Titans can reawaken Azeroth. 407 years ago, Platy left her legendary donuts. These led to the unfortunate circumstance of Dream Whisperer dying horribly. But it's okay because Max Time really knows music. And now a brief character test. Characters. So that, what you're seeing right there is the names of the characters. That's Terra, Locke, Sabin, etc. That's what it looks like when it hasn't been entered yet. I wonder if I should put spaces there. Nah, that's probably fine. I'm going to try pauses. You know, to see how the dialogue flows. I think if I put in, it'll continue automatically, but if I put in, I have to hit the button. Anyways, obviously this is just a complete test case, but this is how I would do Final Fantasy VI. Because I have access to a lot of editing tools when it comes to Final Fantasy VI, so... That's always been the plan for 6, is to go ahead and do that. And yeah, you can tell it's old, because not only do I mention Max Time, who hasn't been with us for a while, but Platy, who was there the day I actually showed that off. Yeah, Chrono Trigger is one of the biggies. Chrono Trigger is one of the magnum opus attempts. In fact, I kind of hinted at this because I've been using Chrono Trigger as an example, but I've actually been thinking about how I would do Chrono Trigger, assuming the test of the next game actually works, of me adding dialogue to the game. Which I don't know yet. Well, we'll see. We'll see how well that works. Maybe I suck as a writer. I don't know. If I'm going to do a theater of game with this type of expertise, will I have an actor for it? Depends, Evo. Usually I do like to have a narrator voice actor. In fact, Undertale does have a narrator. As you'll hear in about 40 minutes, Cord is the first voice actor you will hear in the Undertale theater. And he voices the narration twice in the game. But sometimes I let it just be text, so to use Undertale as an example again, there's a portion where you go through and there's some dialogue on a screen, or on a wall, and it's listing the history of the world. And I have to decide if that's voiced or not, because it's a creative decision at that point, right? It would be fine to have someone voice it, and it would be fine to not. I decided in Undertale's case to not have anyone voice that, because I felt it worked better as dialogue on the screen, rather than as, to show it in contrast to the voice acting. I wanted to make most of the voice acting clear that that's actually a person speaking. I also, obviously, I can't really show any of this off right now, because I don't want to spoil it, but I also stretched my audio editing techniques substantially with this one. Which is fine. I've been getting better and better audio editing over the last year. So, the cave flowers are voiced because those are actual echoes of people who have actually talked. So those are voiced. In fact, there's a consistent thing. Yeah, Lemon Bread, I don't want to spoil it, but Lemon Bread turned out really well. I'm happy with that. I suddenly can't think. Oh, right. I was thinking of other games. I admit, yeah, Lemon Bread. One of the things you'll notice when you see the credits for Undertale is such and such, Lemon Bread, such and such, this person, and Lemon Bread, this person, such and such, and Lemon Bread. We got 12 distinct actors and actresses to voice Lemon Bread. And, did a good job. But part of the thing, so audio editing, right? Anybody who knows anything about audio editing knows that if you want a certain sound, you have to nudge it that way. It doesn't just sound that way. You can't just put 12 voice actors speaking alongside each other and do that, because it won't sound any good. So you have to do something with it. And so I did several things with it in order to make Lemon Bread actually sound good. I think it worked out well, but you'll see in Chapter 5 in about 5 weeks. Or 4 weeks, I guess. What that signifies, Nightingale, is that's a game that I'm interested in. A game I would like to play. That's all. There's also a key on the left side of the website, the left column, where it says that too. Harvest Moon, I mean, I was actually thinking about Stardew Valley. The biggest catch with Stardew Valley is Stardew Valley would be kind of as difficult as Undertale would be to construct a narrative, because there's no innate narrative, right? The only thing that happens in Stardew Valley happens because I do it. So I would have to sit down and think, okay, this is the character we're marrying, these are the people we're going to raise our friendship with, we're going to do this on this day, we're going to do this on this day, etc., right? I would have to actually sit down and map out an enormous amount of the game before we even sat down and recorded it. Doable, but whew, that would be a task. Random in Stardew Valley? I mean, obviously you'd be Krobus. Yes, Stardew Valley would also involve lots of editing to cut out the gameplay in pretty much the same manner that Final Fantasy Tactics would require. Same problem with Harvest Moon, though. That's what reminded me of that. Whoever said Harvest Moon a moment ago. That depends on how you define it, Ect, but either way, direct donations and bits are by far the largest percent. And yeah, of course, Shadow Machine, because we're showing only one version, so we can't show all of them, right? There would also... So one of the things I've thought about before as well is putting one of the Mega Man games in. One moment, please. Point in fact, I've actually thought a lot about doing a Mega Man game. You're probably thinking, why? There's no dialogue in a Mega Man game. Bingo. If I did a Mega Man game, it would probably be a relatively short one, and it would be pretty much entirely there to add dialogue. It would be a test case of the concept I was just talking about, adding dialogue to a game that doesn't have any. Now, the catch with that is Mega Man doesn't lend itself towards that much, not that well, because Mega Man has no one to talk to. So the boss could say something, and Rock could say something upon starting a mission or reaching a boss, but there's a huge gap in there, right, where nothing's actually happening. You're just going through the stage. Yeah, you'd have to add scenes, pretty much exactly right. And at that point, what I'm doing is effectively the Star Trek rewrite. For those of you who haven't seen that, I am using sprites in that manually animated and then done alongside and blah, blah, blah. So at that point, I wouldn't actually be playing the games. I would be animating scenes for the games and then try and do it that way, which... yeah. So, probably not happening. It is something I've tossed around as an idea. It's just... I was thinking that exactly, Lord Harriman. The Navigator concept, right? So we'd have someone voice Roll, we'd have someone voice Rock. They don't sound like kids, I hate that. And they're talking to each other, maybe have Light talk to him on some missions. You know, as she's trying, up ahead, there's such and such and such and such. And of course, I would know what's up ahead, because by the time at which I was writing the dialogue, I would already have the footage recorded. So I could say exactly, there's these 3 enemies in this pit, you need to be careful about that rock, and so forth and so on. So it's doable. It is doable. And I do know how to edit audio to make it sound like it's coming from different sources nowadays, which I do several times in this one because there's a lot of phone calls in Undertale. But Link to the Past? There's not a lot of dialogue in Link to the Past, and fairly large swaths of nothing happening. Most Zelda games have the same problem, actually. There's large swaths of dungeon, and then boss fight, where there's absolutely no dialogue. And then there's usually like a big chunk of dialogue in the middle, right? And then you go to another large swath of it. I will admit, I will go ahead and freely admit, however, despite the complaint I just mentioned, a game I would love to do is, oh, you'll see Hazardous. A game I would love to do is Twilight Princess. Now, I'm just going to go and give this away. We're not doing Twilight Princess next. That's way too big of a project. And like I said, I do want to kind of pull it down a little bit for the next one. I haven't said it yet, Ect. But I would love to do Twilight Princess. Now, if you're paying attention, you've noticed that I just talked several times about how I want to add dialogue to the game for the sections that have no dialogue. Much of the reason I want that tutorial of doing that is so I can do Twilight Princess, because that's exactly what I do. I'd have dialogue between Midna and Link. I'd have dialogue with the enemies. I'd have dialogue with the bosses, and try to flesh out the dungeons a little bit so that they're more interesting rather than just long stretches of dungeon, right? And then, you know, we have the obvious dialogue in the middle and blah, 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 blah. So that's one of the wish list games. That's something I want to build up to. I really want to do a Twilight Princess theater someday. I'm not sure, Rex. I'm also kind of so I'm admittedly staring at Nintendo and kind of hoping they'll do a modern port. Because if they do a Switch port of Twilight Princess, I'm gold. If they don't, I'd probably just go ahead and hook up my Wii U and capture from that. Because I do have that. Sorry, Larian, I thought I answered you earlier. I guess you weren't here for that. We've looked at Monkey Island, and... it's just... Monkey Island, in addition to already having its own dialogue, is not a game I know particularly well, but it is something we could do, and if I was to do an adventure game in general, well, Monkey Island would be one of my higher-up picks, you know? Oh, I suppose I should talk about the last thing here. I've been saving this towards the end, and I just noticed we got half an hour until the actual theater goes live. But first I'm going to answer X's question. Yes, anything you put monetarily towards the show can be put towards the game, as a thank you. You're not paying for the game because it's a legal distinction that has to exist for legal protections, but as a thank you, any money you put into it can be put towards the game. I know, right, Shikor? It's frustrating. So, one thing I've been thinking about as well, and this is especially relevant because I know a lot of my actors are here right now. I've been thinking, and me and Reloaded have been tossing this idea back and forth a bit. I've been thinking about, I don't know how to phrase this. Voice acting the Trek rewrite is the simple answer. Now, there's a lot of gradient there in terms of actual production, but the summary is exactly what it sounds like. You play Archer, you play T'Pol, you play Reed, you play Tucker, etc., etc. We get someone to play Cisco, we get someone to play Janeway, and for my animations that we do, they would either fully voice act it, so there would be no narration, it would just be a fully voice acted animation at that point. That's the upper limit, by the way. That's the probably not going to happen, but, you know, if I win the lottery, I'm just saying. More realistically, below that, do me a favor, Act, hit refresh, and there should be a button that pops up. And I need you to hit that button so it'll actually go through. It should be something on the chat window, somewhere around there. More realistically, what I've been thinking about is, so let's say, let's pull up an example here, actually. Excuse me. Yeah, actually, yeah, that's exactly right, Hazardous. No legal connection, but exactly, Lunaruth. You've already got the thing is, anybody who signs up for that would be signing up for the long haul, because this is going to be a very long project doing the Trek rewrite, and by the nature of Trek, several of these characters are going to be coming back in the future. But if you give me a minute here, I'm trying to think of the best way to get this on screen.
The NXO.
Shut up. Let's just do... actually... Hang on. Hey! Okay. So, the more realistic option is we'd go ahead and have me being like, I'm doing the narration. Narrate. And then there would be snippets, substantial moments, key lines, periodically throughout the work that would be voiced by their actors. So, like, the person playing Archer, who's there on the screen right now, for example, would probably not do any dialogue, even though he's saying several lines here, until we get to something right about here. Oh, not here, sorry. Hang on. Right there. And so he actually does have a line of dialogue there. And so we'd actually have the person voicing Archer speak that, and then get overridden. And then we go back to the narration. You get the idea? It's kind of a partial voice acting option, which is a little bit more realistic and a little bit less horrifying to do. And the whole point, creatively, would be to have the actual actors playing the characters accenting their lines, their characters, and their scenes, and making them more substantial by virtue of actually having voice acting for that one little tidbit, right? This is something we're both thinking about sincerely and seriously. We're definitely not doing it right now. One way or the other. That's definitely not on the list. You got it, Ect. Thank you very... Oh, you can't see me. Whatever, I'm bowing anyways. Thank you very much, as always. I do appreciate it. Muchly, thank you. So, for example, here's another perfect example. Hang on, I'm actually going to unmute past me here.
That the wisdom of the Vulcans and the strength of the humans serve good counterpoint one to another. They need to be thinking about the future, not just the immediacy.
So, okay. There's this bit where Hoshi is talking to Saval here, right? And she says, and I quote, "You presume it only affects Vulcans?"
Be thinking about the future, not...
And he just kind of reacts to that, right? Stuff like that. Little snippets like that. That's the kind of idea there. And I'm not sure if we're going to go forward with that. Like I said, so I'll go ahead and say this. What we're thinking about doing, if we end up doing that, is we'll do that with the end of Season 1. That'll be like the big moment where people start actually voicing that. People actually start responding and speaking their characters' lines. And we'll design that final episode of Season 1 to be in that manner. Thus that, that'll be like a big, oh my gosh. Actually, these are Vulcans, Dakota. Or Romulans, depending. But yes, I do try to use consistency. Metal Gear Solid people are humans. River City Ransom people are Vulcans. Don't ignore those people. Those people aren't there. Foreshadowing. 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 Oh, God, so much foreshadowing. This episode hasn't gone live yet. But you get the idea. I try to use consistent sprites when it comes to this sort of thing. But thank you very much, Sisyphus Happy. Always appreciate. I will jot that down for the Zelda block. Thank you. Now, with your permission, I think I've kind of said everything I wanted to say. Yep, Mighty Final Fight is... I can't believe you paid attention to that, Zetzler. But yes, Mighty Final Fight is Klingons. They've only shown up once so far. And, yeah, I've been pretty consistent about species. Wait until you see the Andorians. They show up later. Anyways, I'm going to go and chop this off and get out of the uniform because I'm boiling alive here, and then go over to the actual theater. Of course, I will give a link to it in chat right now so that, anybody who doesn't actually know can just go and find it. I don't know why it's closed on my screen right now, but it is for some stupid reason. There we go. Undertale Theater, Chapter 1. I'm nervous. I guess I'm always nervous. That's whatever. There you go. See y'all in about half an hour.